And before this video begins, I'd just like to give a special thank you to my Asban Team level patron, Fallon Cortez. Thank you for supporting the channel. So recently, Doctor Who announced its first proper spin-off in 8 years. The War Between the Land and the Sea. Yes, that name is awful, and yes, I'll talk about that in a moment. The War Between the Land and the Sea joins a pantheon of successful and unsuccessful official Doctor Who TV spin-offs such as K9 and Company, Torchwood, The Sarah Jane Adventures, and Class. This particular one was essentially an open secret for quite a while. Basically, everyone knew it was being made long before its official announcement at Comic-Con last month. Hell, even I made a video about it like a year ago when rumours first started circulating. But Doctor Who spin-offs are a hard thing to justify or get right, and so far, fan reception of The War Between the Land and the Sea has been milquetoast to say the least. So today I thought I would take a look at what we know about this spin-off series and why it isn't exactly an exciting prospect. And yes, the absolutely diabolical title is definitely part of it. So when Russell T Davies came back to Doctor Who, he quickly started to hint and promise spin-offs would be in the works, especially because he previously oversaw the creation and running of Torchwood and the Sarah Jane Adventures alongside the main show back in like 2008. This led to an almost proto-MCU style connected TV universe, where the 3 shows would overlap or cross over to great success. Shortly before Davies returned to be showrunner, he gave a pretty well-known interview where he suggested that Doctor Who should have a similar connected universe once more, with all sorts of spin-offs about different characters and places, a heavily loaded release slate to rival that of Disney Plus's spin-offs of Marvel and Star Wars. So from a very early point, we were told to expect spin-offs and to anticipate them. Tales of the TARDIS is considered a spin-off by the production team, but it's obviously not the kind of series Davies was pitching in that interview. So War Between the Land and the Sea is the first proper spin-off of this new era. It seems to be part of the wider Disney Plus co-production deal, which is promising, and if it's successful it will surely lead the way to more spin-offs, be they limited series or multi-series shows. But I really don't think this is the right one to start with, even if it does have its roots within the main show itself. A unit spin-off has always been an idea fans have kicked around as a possible one, since they've been an established force within the show for 56 years by this point. UNIT is an organisation centred entirely around combating aliens or monstrous creatures threatening Earth and the human race, which seems like the natural fit for a spin-off. And indeed, Real Time Pictures made licensed fan films like Downtime and Demos Rising, both featuring UNIT as a central presence. And then there's BB which had the UNIT knockoff Probe, so it's really no surprise that UNIT was the first place the production team thought to look for this new spin-off, especially with Flux, Power of the Doctor, the 60th specials and Series 14 all placing a significant emphasis on UNIT, and specifically their leader Kate Stewart. Big Finish had been making UNIT audio dramas with Kate and Osgood for quite a while, giving us a picture of what a TV version might look like, so fans were pretty quick to accept and understand rumours and a Miro report about a UNIT spin-off being in production, because it made so much sense, but it's just a bit safe and lazy in my opinion. So for a long time, the War Between the Land and the Sea was just a concept, a rumour by the Mirror, and a simple title revealed by Davies in an edition of Doctor Who magazine. There was nothing concrete and it wasn't even official yet, but pre-production was already underway and listed on official industry websites. Therefore, it was no surprise when Doctor Who had a panel at San Diego Comic-Con and the show was announced officially. At the Friday panel, The War Between the Land and the Sea was unveiled as a 5-part limited series featuring Kate Stewart and Colonel Ibrahim as the Sea Devils reveal themselves to the world and UNIT has to step in and stop them. You know, all very standard stuff. There had previously been rumours of a spin-off centred around different Doctor Who monsters, and it sounds like that could still be on the cards, with each series being a standalone, self-contained variation of The War Between, or that concept was just an early version of what we have now. Either way, All we know so far is this premise, the writer, the director, and the 4 main cast members, 2 of whom might be playing Sea Devils for all we know, since they've already been in the main show before in significant roles, although that's never stopped them before. In fact, I think they actually get off on it, honestly. They just love to recast people in the show. Okay, so my first issue with the show is obviously the title, which is way too long-winded and convoluted. It feels like a working title they'd just used for early pre-production before coming up with something better. Like, it's just such a mouthful, and not only is it needlessly long, it's just bland and uninspired. Speaking of bland and uninspired, sorry, that's pretty harsh. But the main co-writer is Pete McTighe, whose main show writing credits are Kablam and Praxius, which doesn't exactly inspire confidence. I know he's done some good work on the collection trailers, but giving a spin-off to one of the weakest writers of an already weak era isn't really a good look for the quality of the show. At least the directing will hopefully be good, with Dylan Holmes Williams taking the helm after previously directing 73 Yards and Dot on Bubble, which does inspire confidence because those stories actually looked really good. Anyway, I think the premise of the war between the land and the sea is just kind of boring. It's very run-of-the-mill, like a regular Doctor Who episode just split into 5 parts for some reason. It almost feels like a waste of a spin-off, honestly. I've not seen anyone excited about this premise because it's just something we've seen so many times before. Hell, even Big Finish already did this exact scenario with Unit Assembled 7 whole years ago. This isn't the kind of spin-off fans wanted, so it really doesn't surprise me that the majority simply don't care about it. The war between the land and the sea also falls into the so-called alien cops problem. And yes, I know Sea Devils aren't actually aliens, but you know what I'm getting at. Doctor Who seems to only be capable of releasing spin-offs where a group of Earth-based heroic characters have to fight back against alien or monstrous incursions. So for this show to do the same is incredibly redundant and repetitive. Like I said, it's something we've seen before, time and time again. But the show is basically just a more modern take on Torchwood and the Sarah Jane adventures with the same tired format rather than pushing the boundaries and trying something new or interesting. We've already been overexposed to UNIT thanks to their heavy presence in the last 3 years of Doctor Who content. School Reunion served as a backdoor pilot for the Sarah Jane adventures due to Sarah Jane being reintroduced, but it was one single episode and was different enough to the spin-off that it's fine. UNIT, however, has had such a constant presence in Doctor Who recently that a whole spin-off about them feels unnecessary because it can't do anything we haven't already been seeing within those 3 years of stories featuring the organisation. UNIT may be a solid, long-time staple of the show, but it hasn't been interesting in quite a while now. Kate Stewart has always been written weakly despite Gemma Redgrave doing her best, and the organisation just feels a bit weak and inefficient within the main show, so it's hard to justify it or care about them becoming the central focus. It also doesn't help that the main antagonists of the show are the Sea Devils, the classic Who monsters reintroduced in the critically panned Legend of the Sea Devils, which was the diabolically boring and terrible Easter special in 2022. In fact, the Sea Devils were one of the weakest elements of the episode, especially, when they started Mario jumping. So it's hard to justify them suddenly being elevated to such status as to have a leading villain role of their own spin-off show. They're also just not very interesting as a race, and at risk of a hot take, they never really have been. Let's take another look at that synopsis. When a fearsome and ancient species emerges from the ocean, dramatically revealing themselves to humanity, an international crisis is triggered. With the entire population at risk, units step into action as the land and sea wage war. Wow, congratulations, you've basically just summed up every Silurian and Sea Devil story Doctor Who has ever told. One of my main issues with these Doctor Who monsters is how all their stories end up being pretty much the exact same without fail, touching upon the exact same beats and themes without doing anything new. And judging by that synopsis, that's not going to change here. The Sea Devils will show up, people will freak out, then UNIT will arrive, the The Sea Devils will demand ownership of Earth, UNIT will refuse, then they fight for a bit, then they try to negotiate, only for the sympathetic Sea Devil to die to their evil underling, then they all fight again and it ends, just like Hungry Earth and Cold Blood, just like the Silurians back when they were first introduced. All this stuff just keeps happening. It's just what always seems to happen with these concepts, and it's so boring. I just don't find the Sea Devils very interesting. The only thing to them and the Silurians is their nature as a species predating humanity, which is fine on its own, but you need something more. What we have is so one note, and I don't think the show has ever used them in a very interesting or gripping way. It's literally just, hey look, lizard people! And I don't see this instance being any different. It'll just be dragged out for 5 hours rather than 1. But look, I get it, it's very easy to criticise and pass judgment. After all, I couldn't do much better, right? Well, as a matter of fact, as it happens, I do have a better idea. Not to toot my own horn. And it's a very simple fix actually. Just make it a Lovecraft story. Have a troubled journalist or detective or partnership of both travelling to a mysterious fishing village where weird things have been reported. They start their investigation and things seem somewhat fine to start with, just an isolated fishing village with aloof inhabitants and strange customs. But then they start to notice more and more things that don't make sense, with those strange customs and interesting unearthly technology. And yes, they worship the great old one Dagon, who was created by Lovecraft, and in other documentaries media has been adopted as the Sea Devil's god. Like I said, just make it a Cthulhu-esque story with a Doctor Who sheen and Sea Devils, rather than a typical action drama with gunfights and UNIT and blah 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 like a typical generic Doctor Who story. It would be a very haunting and mysterious horror show akin to things like the early years of Haven or the current show From or things like that. You can obviously tone down the most visceral or nightmare-inducing horror elements for the younger audiences, but it would be a much more interesting use of the Sea Devils by seeing them through this very human lens. It would also mean we don't have to deal with the typical land or sea ownership storyline, because these Sea Devils would already have become so entrenched within society, culture and religion of the fishing village that the villains are already well established and living alongside humans, for better or for worse. Interestingly, the comic Clara Oswald and the School of Death actually does something a little similar to this, with Sea Devils infiltrating an island and converting humans into Sea Devil hybrids like the Prime Minister himself. Whilst a lot more traditionally Doctor Who, obviously, it does at least show that there's a place for more sinister body horror stories with the Sea Devils. I just think this Lovecraftian slant would be a really gripping and unique direction to take a spin-off, especially considering it's a limited miniseries already, which lends itself perfectly to a one-off narrative like this. But hey, I guess instead you could just have UNIT fighting the Sea Devils in the same way we've seen a billion times before, because that's just fun, isn't it? I've just not found myself caring about Doctor Who in general these last couple of weeks, and the war between the land and the sea was kind of the final straw because I just have anti-excitement for it. I feel like it's entirely the wrong kind of spin-off to make, something so safe and bland with one overexposed protagonist organisation and one monster that recently returned in one of the worst episodes of the entire modern show. I don't think any fan was chomping at the bit or clamouring for a spin-off all about the Sea Devils, because the Sea Devils are, and always have been, a little bit boring as villains. There are so many better spin-off ideas out there, or even tweaking the genre and premise could make a world of difference. We were all really excited for Doctor Who to come in with all sorts of cool, varied spin-offs to create a rich and lived-in universe again. But to start with this specific show feels really disappointing and derivative, because it may as well have just been an episode of Series 15 rather than a 5-part limited series on its own. There's a reason Torchwood Children of Earth is considered the gold standard of Doctor Who spin-off content, because it does something so drastically different and interesting with the idea. A spin-off should take a direction the main show can't or won't take, but The War Between the Land and the Sea is the opposite. It's the same familiar premise of so many previous spin-offs and other Doctor Who stories entirely. Like I said, I'm not excited for this show. Even Class felt somewhat unique and distinctive, for better or for worse, unlike this. I personally don't think I'll even be watching it unless I have to for this job, but I still hope it at least does well so the show can hopefully get some better spin-offs afterwards. Sometimes you've got to suffer before you can strike gold. or at least that's just the copium. Anyway, that's all for now. What do you think about the war between the land and the sea? Are you excited, or are you in the same boat as me? No pun intended. Let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye. And I'd just like to give an extra special thank you to my Asbantium level patron Fallon Cortez, my Platinum level patron Matthew Burns, and all my Gold level patrons Chris Douglas, Daniel Shillito, Thomas Zerr, and the 3 Railway Engines. Thank you so much for your support.